Hey everyone, today we're looking at price elasticity of demand. That sounds like a weird concept. We already know the law of demand is that when price increases, quantity demanded decreases and vice versa. So we know that quantity demanded is affected by price, right? What price elasticity of demand tells us is how sensitive it is or how responsive it is, quantity demanded, to a change in price. So let's get started. Start with a definition. So it's a measure of the responsiveness of quantity demanded of a good or service to a change in its price. That works. There is an equation to work this out. So price elasticity of demand equals the percentage change. This triangle symbol represents the concept change. Percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. So let's look at an example. Here, we've got a good that's gone up in price by 20%. They've increased the price by 20%, yet quantity demanded only falls by 5%. So put that into our equation, we get a number 0.25. There's always going to be a negative sign there, so we just ignore the negative sign. That's why I've put it in brackets there. Not important. So what does this tell us about the responsiveness of quantity demanded? Well, it is what we call inelastic. It's got inelastic demand because we know that the value is less than 1. And it's also going to have a steep demand curve. That's another characteristic of inelastic demand. So when we try to remember what inelastic means. So inelastic demand means it's relatively insensitive to price, right? Huge increase in price, but a less than proportionate change in quantity demanded. Okay, let's look at elastic demand, right? So we can see straight away the shape of the curve. It's much flatter here. So this good increase in price of 10%, but we're really responsive. Consumers are really responsive to this increase in price. There's a decrease in demand of 40%. So we put that into our equation. We've got a PD of 4. And what we can tell from that is that price elasticity of demand greater than 1 means it's elastic demand. So elastic demand means we're very responsive. Consumers are very responsive to a change in price. Now the concept we're going to look at here is a total revenue test. Now, revenue, just to make sure people know that meaning of that word, it's just price times quantity. It's the money that you bring in. It's not profit, but it's the money you bring in. So how many you sell multiplied by the price you sell them for. Okay, so let's look at this market for apples here. Let's say the price goes up, goes from P to P1, and apples have pretty elastic demand, let's say. So a greater than proportional decrease in quantity demanded here. Good, we can see that. Now, what we can show here is that they sort of gain some revenue from doing this. So they get a higher price per apple that they sell or per kilo of apples that they sell. So we consider this the revenue that they gain. But by raising the price, they lose revenue as well. They lose the amount that they sell. They're going to sell fewer apples. So revenue foregone is here. What we can see is that the revenue gained is far less than the revenue that they have foregone. Therefore, the total revenue will fall. So here we have elastic demand. An increase in price is going to lead to a decrease in total revenue. That rule will always hold. In class, we're going to extrapolate that to a decrease in price with elastic demand and also what happens with inelastic demand. But if you get those notes, for now, I'm confident that we'll be able to extrapolate that pretty well. Okay. Next, we're going to look at the determinants of PD. So what makes a good or service elastic or responsive to a change in price, and what makes it inelastic, unresponsive to a change in price? Okay, let's have a look. So again, I'm going to go through these in detail. So similar to determinants, non-price determinants of demand and supply, I've also got a mnemonic device for us here. So we'll go through these in detail, but the word is splat. Nice, easy word to remember. So we're going to go through each of these in detail. So as long as you get these down as a bit of a summary, and we use the mnemonic device. I'm pointing at my screen, my finger again, that doesn't work. That'll help us remember it. Okay, substitutes. The number and closeness of substitutes matters here. So the more close substitutes a good has, the more sensitive consumers are going to be to a price, because if the price of one good goes up, if there's a really close substitute, something that's pretty much the same, they'll just buy that instead. So price goes up, great increase, great decrease in the quantity demanded, right? So let's look at a few examples. Here we've got two types of car. We've got a Hyundai i30 and a Ford Focus. You know, they're little mid-sized cars, 2-litre engines, probably. They are pretty much the same, right? There's not a huge difference in them. So if the price of one goes up, that's going to have quite a large drop in demand, in quantity demanded, because people will be buying the Focus, right? So close substitutes, elastic demand. Now, petrol and petrol. This looks a bit weird, but the price of petrol goes up. What are you going to do? What's your substitute? You don't have a close substitute for petrol. People might say, oh, electric cars. But I don't have an electric car. I've got a petrol car. So if petrol price goes up, I just have to buy petrol still. I can't put electricity in my petrol car. So it's not a close substitute. So therefore, if there are no close substitutes, we have inelastic demand. I might buy a little less petrol. You know, I might be able to avoid some driving, but I still need to get to work every day. So I'm going to buy petrol still. I have my demand, and that of a lot of people is, you know, insensitive to the change in price. Okay, the next one, P, the proportion of income. If a small proportion of income is spent on a good, a change in price will have negligible impact on quantity demanded, because it's not a big decision. So therefore we have inelastic demand. So I'll give you some examples to show this. Something like a pencil or a pack of gum, I don't even know how much they cost. And that's sort of the point. You buy a pack of gum, the price might increase by 10%. Would you actually notice? I don't think I would. I don't think I would notice if one week a pencil was $1 and the next week it's $1.10. That's a 10% increase, but it's probably not going to do much to change my demand for pencils, right? So therefore, because it's such a small proportion of income, relatively insensitive to a price change. It's not affecting my behavior that much. If a large proportion of income is spent on it, it can greatly affect the quantity demand because it's a big purchasing decision. So example would be buying a car, right? If it goes up by $1,000, that could affect your demand for it by quite a bit. Should be talking in a market term. It's going to affect consumers' demand for it by quite a bit. Okay, the L brings us the idea of a good being a luxury or a necessity. So we sort of touched on this with petrol, but the more necessary it is for consumers to buy it, the more inelastic the demand is. They have to buy it. So it looks like a lot's going on here, but let's look at this flowchart. So on a basic level, food is a necessity. We have to buy it. So price of food, in general goes up. I'm insensitive to price. I'm still going to buy it. I become a little bit more insensitive to price, as a little more sensitive to price as the food gets more different. There's no close substitute to food, right? So I have to buy it. Whereas there is some sort of substitute for buying meat. You can buy vegetables, for example. They're not close substitutes, but they are substitutes. If we go further down the meat line, beef, chicken, and pork, they're all meat, good sources of protein. So they are somewhat substitutes for each other, but not super close. Then if we drill down on chicken a bit more, chicken nuggets, chicken wings, they become much closer substitutes to each other than, say, beef or chicken. And we can go even further. Chicken nuggets, brand A nuggets and brand B nuggets, that almost the same. So we would be very sensitive to price, as we talked about before. If brand A increases in price, they might have a large decrease in quantity demanded because people are buying brand B instead. Okay. Addiction. So this is, it is a necessity. It's at an extreme though. So addicted people can be willing to pay almost any price for what they need to feed their addiction. So example is cigarettes. This is a classic example that we use in economics. Price keeps going up. We keep on increasing the tax on cigarettes every year, and people sort of keep buying them, right? They decrease their quantity demanded, but not by much. It's less than proportional to the increase in price, which makes it inelastic. Some people get addicted to little mobile phone games. I think this is Candy Crush. I can't remember. But then people want to do these little micro transactions, which they spend way too much money on. Okay, and this is supposed to represent crack. So addictive illicit drugs. So extremely addictive. You're seeing people, well, hopefully you haven't seen people, but you know that people ruin their lives with addictive drugs. Okay, so that's the A, addiction. Okay, the longer the time you have to make a decision. So the longer amount of time you have to change your behavior, so over a longer time period, demand for almost any good will become more elastic over time, more responsive to a change in price. So on the left here, we have electricity, and in Australia, some parts of Australia predominantly produced by coal. Definitely decades ago as well. So if the price of coal increases and so coal generated electricity becomes more expensive, at the time there might not be a close substitute, right? But the longer the time period becomes, the more feasible it is to start to switch over to renewable electricity such as solar panels. So the longer the amount of time, the more elastic demand becomes. Okay, so remember SPLAT. That'll help us in class. We've going to do plenty of practice of these concepts in class, so I will see you then.